I wanted to hop on and do a little bit of a story time. I know that's a very maybe overused YouTube term, but it is something that's been talked a lot about on my Instagram. I started my Instagram actually like March of 2021, and I was not diagnosed with ADHD until November of 2021. So those of you who have been like on this Instagram kind of journey with me for a while know that it was something that happened rather recently. This is still kind of only like 5-6 months into actually like being diagnosed, which is a lot of backstory. All to say, you know, I do talk about what that process has been like and what it's like to be diagnosed with ADHD, and to finally understand like, yeah, I am like clinically neurodivergent at 28. I'm 28 years old, and I just got this diagnosis, and that it's called a late stage diagnosis, and that is definitely something that has been affecting me a lot. There's gonna be lots of ums. I do not have a script. I'm literally sitting this down and I just hit record. So you're just gonna have to forgive the fact that this may not be the most professional thing you've ever seen. That's fine. So if I'm looking down, I do have like a couple of like symptom notes pulled up, but I didn't make any like outlines for what I wanted to say. It is definitely a really different journey getting diagnosed with ADHD, A, as a woman, and B, as an adult woman, and C, also as someone with serious like emotional abuse and religious trauma, because mental health is not always regarded really highly in those scenarios, and it's not something that, you know, is talked about. You're supposed to pray your problems away. Really what happened, and the thing that kind of like made me think maybe I should pursue a diagnosis, was one of my very, very close friends has ADHD and has been diagnosed, and we were just getting on so well, which is not just we get along for a lot of reasons, not just because we are both ADHD, but a couple of my friends have it, and then I'm close to some team members at my office, and they opened up to me that they have it too. And I was like, I think in really similar patterns to the way that these women operate, and all of these women have ADHD. And then I started doing a little bit more research into it in terms of what it means to be ADHD like as a woman, and how those symptoms are different. And it's crazy. ADHD in women is really, really difficult. You can hear a lot of noises because my dog is JV's trying to play right now. ADHD is really, really different in women than it is in boys. Most of the tests and like studies that they've done on ADHD have been on like adolescent teen boys. And ADHD looks wildly different in women. So like what you expect is that like hyperactivity, can't sit still, and those symptoms actually are the opposite in women, like the opposite. So sometimes it takes a lot for a woman to get an ADHD diagnosis, because most people just think like, oh, hyper kids, ADHD. And it's so much more different than that. It is one of those things. I also read recently, and I have not been diagnosed, so I will not be talking about this because I don't have any personal experience, but like also 20 to 50%, it's like a 20 to 50% of people who have ADHD are also like somewhere on the autistic spectrum. I have not been tested for that, so I'm not gonna go there in terms of saying anything. I don't have facts or anything, like it's just not part of my experience, but like it is so much more than hyper kids. It's something that has absolutely like always affected my life, my relationships, everything that I do. And yeah, it's not hyper kids. It's so many more things than that. So one of the things, and this is where I'm gonna be reading off of some notes. I'll link some resources down below too. Please also, do not diagnose yourself off of this video. Please seek medical help. This is not supposed to be a diagnostic tool of any kind, this video. And it is also not supposed to be, don't take this necessarily as fact. This is not a medical opinion, you know, disclaimer. This is just just my experience. Women, on the other hand, have a tendency to exhibit inattentive ADHD, which makes it hard to focus, pay attention to details, stay organized, listen, and remember things. So it's not that like fidgeting, always on the go, disruptive. That's in boys. It's actually in women. They have more of that inattentive style. Some of the characteristics of ADHD, though, can sometimes be looked at as like personality traits, which is a little wild. It's something that like I'd never really dug into this until so much recently. It's just one of those things where, especially like if you're thinking of like teenage girls too, I mean, like that I was at one point, you know, girls and women have fewer externalizing symptoms like aggression in men. So if you've got a preteen boy who's maybe really, really hyper and like has aggression that's not normal, socialization's a big part of that. Men aren't necessarily afraid to be angry in our society, but women, you know, women are so much more programmed to act, do, and be a certain way. And that was amplified in my experience because I was a pastor's daughter. So I also had this huge religious tie of having to like act, be, and do a certain way. And that's called masking. It's an ADHD symptom as well. Masking is when it's like when you have to put forth effort to appear more normal, or appear the way that you want to in a crowd. So it's like called masking. So I would spend, and most women just broadly like experience masking in some, just because of society, because you like act a certain way, do a certain thing because you're supposed to, because like that's what society tells you to do. But like women are so much trained, are less trained to be open about their emotions. So it's like another reason that you might not pick up that somebody's masking. There's another, like just a couple of things like literally over the course of my life that just always made sense. I got like addicted to caffeine really, really early. I was like maybe 12 or 13, and that's also really common for ADHD because your brain's essentially trying to self-medicate. It's a stimulant. You're trying to self-medicate. Like I am now on prescription drugs for ADHD. Those are stimulants. Another thing that my friend actually learned and pointed out was that I was always a really big tequila fan, still am. And my friend doesn't like tequila, and we're always like, we have such like similar tastes. It's funny that that's like, alcohol is the one thing that we don't have the same taste on. But apparently, now all alcohol is a depressive, but apparently tequila is the only one that can sometimes feel like a stimulant. It is still a depressive because it is alcohol, but there's something in tequila and the way that it's made that like the effects of tequila are a little bit different, that it can feel like a stimulant. So again, like my favorite alcohol of choice was reaching for what I felt like was a stimulus. Another thing is like fiscal habits in women, like just not be like, I'm good-ish with money. I wouldn't say that I'm like great, but obviously like I pay all my bills, like, you know, I'm okay. But like impulse spending is huge because you're just looking for dopamine because your brain doesn't make it. And I always like am such a shopper because yeah, 1000% like retail therapy, but then like looking at it like, oh my gosh, that's always been huge. And this is not saying that like, obviously people buy, like it's all of these things combined plus a medical diagnosis. Clearly loving to shop does not mean you have ADHD. But just looking at how I've spent my money and like why I would order so much takeout, why even I like ate the way that I do. And I'm still learning how to like re-eat basically because I was getting a lot of my dopamine from food because I don't make dopamine and like serotonin in a normal way. So I like get my dopamine like from food or from, you know, buying stuff or whatever. And that's always like, that's been crazy to look at. I have been diagnosed with like anxiety and depressive thoughts at times. I have absolutely been depressive at times. I have depressive states. And that's also 100% something that is typical with women because they will be diagnosed with anxiety or depression because like, oh, you know, you're just an anxious woman, whatever. But those are actually like sub-symptoms of the broader symptom, like which is ADHD. ADHD effectively, you know, it just is like, for me, my mind's just like always running. I get very, very overstimulated super easily. I think one of the biggest things as well was when I would just like go out downtown with my friends or something, or even just do plans with my friends in public, dinner, whatever. I live in Chicago, so like going out downtown, like there's lots of stuff, clearly lots of like senses and, you know, stuff like that. But like after a couple maybe like not even that long, like just a couple hours, I would have like such a brain fog. And I just was always like, wow, why am I so tired? Like just walking around being downtown must make you so tired, whatever. And then I would have to mask really, really hard to like keep up my energy and keep up appearances for like the rest of the outing. And then I realized, I was like, oh, holy shit, that's overstimulation. Like, I'm overstimulated. And then I would always come back home really, really tired, but then I would be like buzzy again. And that's because I was then overstimulated. So I was exhausted when I was out because I was in the overstimulation, and then I was masking to keep up with it. And then I would come home and then I would be wired again because I was like overcompensating and like was still processing the fact that I was like overstimulated. I'm really not telling this story in like any sort of good order, but these are just like some general symptoms that like I've experienced and how I started to realize that they were ADHD symptoms. I wouldn't say that I'm like broadly forgetful, but like, of course, there's been so many times where I have forgotten things. It's not so much that I'm forgetful, but I will be super, super panicked about that. So I will check, like if I get tickets for a concert, I will check those tickets 87,000 times after, and then after I've bought them, before the event, I will check 37 times that I bought for the right date, I got the right amount, I know where we're going. And I will, and it's not just like, oh yeah, what date was that? Let me double check. It's like a running anxiety. Like, did I bought the thing, okay, yes, nope, that's correct. Okay, right day. It's the 27th or whatever. And it will like create this insane pattern. Also, like, there's just so many times where it does come down to anxiety, where it's just like, I cannot focus on something. And this was really, really big in work and school. Probably the biggest thing at work for me was I would like have all of these things to do, but then I would have a day where it's like, oh, I don't have any meetings today, so I could spend all day working. And I don't even know what I would do, but I just like wouldn't get any work done. You know, I would just have all day to do work projects, and then I just couldn't focus. I just physically couldn't do it. And I would all of a sudden, not like lose time, but I would just be like, oh, let me go grab this, let me do this, okay, whatever, let me just go get a drink and then I'll get started. And then the next thing I knew, it's been 45 minutes or an hour or longer and I haven't gotten like any work done. And it was just such, there's just like this huge mental block. You can hear JB huffing, I'm sure. There's just this huge mental block, and I just thought I was lazy or like unmotivated. But there were just times where I mentally just could not sit down and do the goddamn thing. And I just always thought that was just life. I was lazy or unmotivated, but I could never really explain it. I just thought that that was how life was. One of the other things about women and ADHD that I find interesting, and I'm reading this, but it's psychological distress, feelings of inadequacy, low self-esteem, and chronic stress are common. Often women with ADHD feel like their lives are out of control or are in chaos, and daily tasks may seem really, really huge. And that's just so accurate. I've suffered from every single one of those, like low self-esteem, like always being stressed. I just thought this was life. I just thought this was anxiety. I just thought I was lazy. I just thought I couldn't handle it. I've lived my whole life in this parameter of like being really anxious about stuff, not always able to like sit down and get stuff done, little things making me exhausted, being overwhelmed, having that anxiety and that stress about so many little things. And I just literally always thought that that was life. I just thought that that was how shit worked. And again, only through then these past few months, like talking to friends and then realizing that like I identified with a lot of their patterns, and realizing that like every single friend that I identified with that pattern had ADHD, then I was like, okay, that clearly was not enough for a diagnosis. Like please see a professional. But that was what at least made me like start reading, like, hey, maybe this is a thing. So then I did get diagnosed, and I now am on medication for ADHD, which has 1000% been the right choice for me. Everybody do your own thing. I'm not gonna say that that's right for everybody, but I will say that when I first met with the physician and like had this diagnosis and was like gonna go on medication, you know, I was a little shocked at my internal response, because I've always been like a pretty big mental health advocate, not like out and proud and stuff, but I've just always kind of been like, yeah, okay, some people break bones, some people need glasses, whatever, like your brain's no different, like, you know, people aren't crazy, you take care of yourself, mental illness awareness and all that stuff. But when I first like got the recommendation to go on meds, my brain was like, oh, you're crazy. You know, and that surprised me because I didn't think that I felt that way. And then it was like my turn and I was like, oh damn, there was like still a lot of internal stigma there. So I had to get over that pretty quickly, which I did, luckily. I just was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, we're not gonna subscribe to that theory. We're gonna take our meds. And luckily medication has 1000% been the right thing for me. It's like actually shocking to me. The first day that I took medication for ADHD, I almost cried because I was still me. You know, like I don't think any of my friends think that I've changed remotely. If anything, I'm like more myself than ever in the past few months since like getting a diagnosis and being on medication. So there's no like dulling my sparkle, absolutely not. It was the right choice for me and I still feel like it is my authentic self. But it just got quiet for the first time. I just wasn't secretly running on fumes in the background of my mind, terrified or anxious or worried or like on edge. It was quiet for like the first time. And I realized how many, all of my, like I've been neurodivergent my whole life. Like that is something I'm still grappling with. Because that's the thing, is this is a late stage diagnosis. So I'm an adult and there's a lot of really complicated emotions that come with that. The first one is like relief, for me. And then the second one is this kind of like shock and grief because you realize life was never supposed to be this hard. Like life was never supposed to be this hard. All that time and energy that I spent masking and fighting overstimulation and fighting anxiety and fighting stress and just saying, it's all in your head, just like be chill, like it's just anxiety. I'm like, no, my brain is like a circuit board. Everybody's brain's like a circuit board and mine is literally just wired different. Like it just was never supposed to be this hard. And the anxiety attacks that I've had and the panic attacks that I've had where I've just felt like everything is absolutely tumbling around me and then I can't handle life and I'm so like, none of that, it's real because I experience it, but it's not a real response to my surroundings. It's not a real response to the environment that I'm in, and it's not a real response in a way to my capabilities. Like that's just how my brain is like wired and that's how it processes things. Like I just need a little bit of help. That's all. And it's not supposed to be this fucking hard and I'm not always supposed to be this anxious. And like that I think was just insane to me. And that's something I'm still processing a lot of because it is just fucking wild. This combined with the emotional abuse and religious trauma of my upbringing, you know, I've been in like fight or flight. I probably still am. Like I said, this is such a new thing. I'm like still figuring it out, but like, especially when you look at the other factors in my upbringing, like I have been in fight or flight pretty much for my entire life. And that's exhausting. And there's just so much grief around, like obviously the religious and emotional stuff, like that was something that, what medication was gonna fix that, but like that made everything so much worse and it didn't have to be. And my brain is just fine and I'm not lazy or just over anxious and I'm not just like someone who can't cut it or can't hang or, you know, no. Like that's just not the truth. And just thinking back to so many times where it's like just slowly every I feel like once a week I learn something else from somebody or from a friend, or I'll have like a memory from childhood that I'll suddenly re-remember and I'll be like, oh my God, like that's ADHD. Dissociative daydreaming is really big as a symptom occasionally with ADHD. And I would absolutely write stories for hours as a really young kid as like part of that dissociative like daydreaming. Also, I would spend hours as a young kid, like alone in my room. And, you know, my parents just always like, oh, she's just an old soul. You just are so independent. You'd rather like do things by yourself. And there's like some emotional situations around like my childhood that also had to contribute to that. But no, like that was ADHD. I was desperate to like self-soothe and find a space away from stimuli. Like I had 3 younger sisters. It was a crowded and noisy house. I was spending hours and hours and hours by myself in my room alone with the door shut because I was desperate to not be overstimulated. Like everything overstimulated me. And you know, there's still kind of this image of in my family that I just like don't want to be with anybody else, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, no, that was me trying to get away from being, again, getting away from being overstimulated. I remember like when I was a teenager, I would come home and I would like almost sleep the entire weekend. Now, like obviously teenagers really love to sleep in and they don't like getting up early. Like some of that is just puberty and teenagers, but like I would sometimes sleep for like 16 hours into Sunday, into Saturday. Again, this alone is not necessarily a diagnosis. If you did this as a teen, that does not necessarily mean you have ADHD. It's just all of these things together combined with an actual diagnosis, like were symptoms of. But I would sleep so much, and it was because I was completely burnt out, because I would spend the week masking and doing tons of stuff, going to high school, going to middle school, going to church stuff, being with my family. And then I would be so burnt out from masking and pretending to be normal, or like that gap that required in order to survive. I'd be super burnt out. So I'd sleep like crazy on the weekends. You know, I spoke to some of my girlfriends about that too, and they were like, yeah, we slept a lot on the weekends as teens, but like not like that. Like not as much, not like that. That's a lot. So there's just so many things that kind of went into it. Now, obviously, the biggest thing for me is just like having that focus during the day. Anxiety and depression are like huge symptoms that I've had that come from that ADHD. Being overstimulated is a huge thing. Like I've still experienced that. I definitely hyperfixate on things. I know I've joked before about like my hyperfixation meals. Go in phases. When I was writing The Romanov Oracle, I was hyperfixated on Nando's. I ordered that 4 times a week, I think, for 5 weeks. I think I've had it like once since. I can't go back. Currently Noodles & Co is my current hyperfixation, so there's some waiting for me over there when I'm done filming. But like hyperfixating on a meal and like just eating that one thing, and then all of a sudden you eat it for like maybe the 100th time, but like you just put it in your mouth and you just know in that moment like, oh, nope, this doesn't taste like dopamine anymore. So there's just a lot of things like that. So I did in November, I got an ADHD diagnosis, and you know, it was late stage, and that's really difficult. It comes with processing a lot of emotions, and trying to understand how I am. I basically need to, and this is really new, it's April, you know, this is not even, maybe it is about 6 months old at this point, but like, I'm still having to figure out how to live and how to think. Like every single part of my life needs to be reevaluated. How do I do my finances, my spending? Because of that, like I shop for dopamine. Oh, how do I eat? What does my nutrition look like? Because I eat for dopamine. Like, what does this look like? Because I'm overstimulated. Okay, in that scenario. Okay, I mask in these, like everything in your life has to kind of be reevaluated or looked at from a new perspective with a late stage diagnosis. And then there's just so much grief and relief that it's so interesting, because for a while, you know, I would always have these horrendous panic attacks and like I did think I was crazy. Like I had times when I was in anxiety states or panic attacks or depressive states or whatever, and I would have the worst, like maybe I am crazy. Like maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm crazy. And the thing that's so ironic and interesting to me is like people think that a mental illness diagnosis like means you're crazy. When I got diagnosed with ADHD, that's when I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. That was actually the biggest thing, is I was like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. Like, this is just a thing and I've got to figure out how to deal with it. This is how my brain works. I'm neurodivergent. Been forced to try to figure it out in the neurotypical world. Like, of course I have felt crazy. so that's, I think, the biggest thing for me. You know, again, everyone has their own experiences and they're very, very, very different. I was really lucky to get a diagnosis, somebody who was able to see through, like, it wasn't just anxiety, it wasn't just depression, etc. So, you know, that's something that's been a huge deal for me. So there wasn't a good storyline to this video. It was a little bit all over the place. Those are just some of, like, my symptoms, how I experienced them throughout my life, how they kind of manifested, and, like, the pieces that I'm putting together now. So I'm sure I'll do an update, maybe some, like, tips or tricks that I'm learning, but, like, basically got to learn how to do it. I don't have to learn how to walk again, but you do kind of have to learn how to do everything all over again, because every single part of your life you need to look at through, I need to look at through a new lens now. Like, okay, but wait, is this a coping mechanism? Is this something that I've done because I have ADHD? Is this something that I've done to mask? Is this something that I've done for dopamine? It's exciting and wonderful, and it is a good thing, and it is the right thing for me, but it is also so taxing because I gotta learn how to do everything all over again, kind of. Yeah, kind of. So, we're about 6 months in. I'll do another story time soon. I'll bring you guys on this little journey with me, on how I'm relearning everything. But that's okay. We'll figure it out. So, little rambly. I hope that's okay. But I will see you guys soon, and we'll chat about this again another time. My DMs are always open. You can find me on Instagram at @thepiddlyfileblonde. You can find me on Patreon, all those things, blah, blah, blah. Everything's linked, you know, whatever. You know where to find it. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you next time.